Good morning. I'm Kipp, Associate Pastor. Um, we really did not coordinate on that, but except for the part where we had Priscilla end the reading, because you'll see how that fits with today's assigned Bible reading. But the first reading is a poem that will deal with a father. We're talking about a text today that uses an image, a maternal image for God. But our first reading is a poem by James Cruz. It is a coming out poem talking about his own father. It's called Telling My Father. It should be the experience that everyone has when they come out. Telling My Father by James Cruz. I found him on the porch that morning, sipping cold coffee, watching a crow dip down from the power line into the pile of black bags stuffed in the dumpster, where he pecked and snagged a can tab, then carried it off, clamped in his beak like the key to a room only he knew about. My father turned to me then, taking in the reek of my smoke, traces of last night's eyeliner I decided not to wipe off this time. Out late, was all he said, and then smiled, rubbing the small of my back through the robe for a while, before heading inside, letting the storm door click softly shut behind him. Later, when I stepped into the kitchen again, I saw it waiting there on the table, a glass of orange juice he had poured for me and left sweating in a patch of sunlight so bright I couldn't touch it at first. Stunning. Our second reading is a brief assigned Bible reading from the Gospel of Luke. Chapter 13. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to Jesus. Pharisees often get a bad rap in the texts. The Bible writers, the Gospel writers, aren't quite sure what to make of them. They stand sort of in the middle of things, sometimes favorable, sometimes in some tension. But in this time, some Pharisees came and said to Jesus, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." He said to them, "Go and tell that fox for me. Listen, I'm casting out demons and performing cures today and tomorrow, and on the third day I finish my work." You see how there's a little foreshadowing of Easter right there? "Yet today and tomorrow and the next day I must be on my way, because it's impossible for a prophet to be killed away from Jerusalem." He's headed to Jerusalem. "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you are not willing. See, your house is left to you. I tell you, you will not see me until the time comes when you say, 'Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord,'" which was the Passover coming up shortly after this. So we're in Lent. We're following the stories that take Jesus toward his death. But here we get this beautiful, longing, maternal image for God. D. Westonhauser grew up in the 1950s and 60s in El Paso, Texas. I heard her story on StoryCorps the other day on NPR. I don't know if other people caught this. She was sharing it with her friend Martha Gonzalez. Westonhauser was assigned male at birth, but knew early on that the expectations placed on someone with her type of body did not match her sense of herself. You can imagine that in El Paso, Texas, in the 1950s and 1960s, this was not an easy place to have this kind of knowledge about yourself. It was something that she kept private, mostly private, at least until coming out as transgender at the age of 63 in 2018. She told her friend about an aunt who she would visit sometimes, Aunt Yaya. This is how she described her. It's the image from the perspective of a child looking up to an adult. She said, "If you were to see Aunt Yaya back in the day the way I saw her, she was tall. She had a beautiful angular face with high cheekbones. She had brown eyes. They almost looked like owl eyes, scanning everything." Westonhauser's parents would take her now and then to visit her Aunt Yaya. They would leave her there to spend the night. One time when she was 9, her parents decided it was time to visit again. So they took her, this vulnerable young child, whom they treated as a boy, to visit her aunt. And they dropped her off. They took their leave. And Westonhauser says that as soon as the door closed, Aunt Yaya asked her, "How would you like to change into something that's really comfortable for you?" She says what was there was a blouse and a wig. And so, and I knew I was a girl. And so that weekend, I got to be me. We went shopping in my outfits. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Yaya, and she would introduce me as her niece, which is a great story. A little girl in the 1960s in Texas being seen and appreciated for who she was and being given an opportunity to live that in public in the presence of a beloved adult. But it was still Texas, and it was still the 1960s. And being in that StoryCorps booth, Gonzalez asked Westonhauser, "Would you go home and mention anything like that?" Her answer is about what you'd expect. She said, "No." Yaya said, "When you go home, you have to be what they want. Because if you don't and they find out, you will be hurt. She was the one who taught me early on that I had to play the game." So Aunt Yaya gave her recognition and gave her a safe space and a space to be free, but she also reinforced the dimensions of the closet because her love and her protection could not be everywhere. They weren't omnipresent, and because safety is what she wanted for her little niece. Westonhauser realized much later that the closet was a space that Aunt Yaya shared, that her Aunt Yaya's lifelong friend was really her lover and her partner. And she said, "You never spoke of that back in the day, so Aunt Yaya had to keep herself concealed even as she made room for me to be myself." She closes this reflection by saying, "Yaya never got the love she was supposed to from the rest of the family, and Yaya wanted me to be everything that she wanted to be if she could live her life over again. I loved her. She loved me back. And behind that white door became my place to be the little girl that I needed to be." And Jesus said, "How often I have desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings." As a hen gathers her brood under her wings. That's a remarkable image to come from someone who Christian history has long said was the embodiment of God on this earth, in a text and a tradition that's full of images of God as a stern and often angry father. Here's another one to add the counter testimony. God as the tenderness of a mother hen, gathering her brood. Maybe it was this passage that inspired the 14th century mystic Julian of Norwich to write, "Christ is our mother, brother, and Savior, our natural mother, our gracious mother, because he willed to become our mother in everything, took the ground for his work most humbly and most mildly in the maiden's womb," which is amazing. Listen to the 13th century gender bending around God, or the 14th century. The image is not only one of tenderness. Jesus came up with it in a culture of death. He named this divine maternal longing to a group of Pharisees who had come and told him that Herod wanted him dead. And this is not something that you took lightly in that day. After all, Herod had already killed John the Baptist for preaching the kind of sermon that narcissists don't take kindly to. And as the womanist Bible scholar Will Gaffney reminds us, this is actual history, Herod is from a family where murder is a casual pastime. His father, Herod the Great, had murdered 3 of his sons, 1 of his wives, and 1 of his mothers-in-law, along with former friends and servants. And according to Matthew's gospel, he tried to kill Jesus before he was out of the cradle. So, yeah, you take it seriously when someone tells you Herod wants you dead. And he did, but he wasn't going to let that dissuade him from the work at hand, which involved being with people in need, people on the outside, people whose lives had slipped through any kind of safety net. It wouldn't stop him from caring, from healing, from standing with. Go and tell that fox for me, he said. It wasn't a compliment. Herod was foxy, but it didn't have anything to do with how he looked in negligee. It was more about what happens when the fox gets into the hen house, which makes it all the more striking that Jesus chose this moment to compare himself to a mother hen. The author and activist Casey Overton imagines this story through the imagery of the folklore tales of Brer Rabbit. You might remember those. In her version of this, she imagines Brer Fox is on the prowl to devour Mama Hen. Mama Hen's little chicks are scattered and weary, so she's been tirelessly seeking after them. Brer Bear warns Mama Hen that Brer Fox is tracking her. She should make haste to her coop. Mama Hen continues scooping up her brood in her long wings in open defiance of Brer Fox. But aren't you afraid? Brer Bear asks. Sure, she replied with sorrowful indignation. But I'm a mother first. When the fox gets into the hen house, there's not a lot that the mother hen can do. This is not an image of God that speaks about omnipotence. The mother hen doesn't have weapons to protect herself. She is not a match for the fox's jaws, but she will do everything she can to keep her chicks safe. Like Jesus was, we're living in a culture of death. I'm not even talking about Ukraine today, even though there's not a day this week that the news didn't make me weep. But I mean that with the conflict raging around the globe, we're living in a culture of death right here. The state of Florida just passed a law that people are calling the Don't Say Gay bill. It prohibits teachers in kindergarten through third grade from addressing issues of sexual orientation and gender identity in their lesson plans. The bill supposedly aimed at giving parents more say in the education process. But Ria Kumar, who wrote about this in the Tufts Daily, notes that it will prevent children from with same-sex parents from doing something as simple as drawing a picture of their family, or children who identify with the sex that they were assigned at birth from expressing who they are. And it's a vaguely worded bill, which means that it was designed to intimidate teachers into censoring themselves from doing anything in the classroom that might be interpreted as LGBTQ related. So children who are already vulnerable, who already face mental health risks and bullying, will be left further isolated and endangered. And back in Texas, things aren't much different than the Texas that Dee Westenhauser grew up in the 1950s and 60s, where she learned the contours of her closet, not at the legal level, at least. The Public Research on Religion Institute has done polling and found that almost 3/4 of Texans think that there should be legal protections for LGBTQ people. There should be non-discrimination laws. But legislators in Texas are tripping over themselves to see who can be the most fascist. Governor Greg Abbott is trying to criminalize gender-affirming care for trans youth. He put out a new directive that equates gender-affirming care with child abuse and calls for professionals and members of the general public to report the parents of minors who are receiving or seeking such care. And within a week of his order, the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services started to do just that. Amber Briggle's family is one such family that is under threat. She's got a transgender son, and this is not her first time in the activist limelight. In 2016, when the state tried to prevent trans and non-binary youth from using the restrooms that feel appropriate to them, Briggle invited the state's Attorney General, Ken Paxton, to her home for a home-cooked meal. She thought that perhaps a meal in somebody's home with a family that had a trans young person would help him to see them as human beings rather than as political issues or a way for himself to score points. He apparently even told her at the dinner, "This is nice. It's been a long time since I had kids this age." More than 5 years after being welcomed into their home for a meal, Paxton issued a non-binding legal opinion that equates gender-affirming medical care with child abuse. And that was all that the governor needed for his justification. Suddenly, Amber Briggle and her husband were being investigated for child abuse. She wrote about it in a powerful blog post about being a church-going suburban family with 2 happy, healthy kids, one of them a gymnast and a ukulele player, the other a Girl Scout who swims and takes ballet. You know exactly the kids who look like they're being abused. She writes, "We need you to imagine how it feels to have done nothing wrong and still get that phone call from Child Protective Services." She and her husband had fear and panic. They couldn't sleep. They hired a lawyer for themselves and one for the kids. They had a family meeting to prepare for the scheduled interrogation. They called a social worker who volunteered to create a home study that they could add to their child's safe folder. The CPS worker came to their home to interview them. Briggle writes, "At the end of the interview, she requested to inspect the rest of the house. We showed her all the food in our cabinets, the kids' artwork on the walls, the toys, books, the games in the family room, the dining room where we light our chalice before dinner, the gardens and trampoline in the backyard, the beds piled with blankets and stuffed animals. We are so fortunate to have all this. It was impossible for her not to feel the love in our home. We did not allow her into the kids' bedroom. She had violated our home by entering it. We didn't want her to violate their sacred spaces. Before she left, she said that we were clearly doing something right," as she gestured toward our son, who was practicing his cello. Then she left. But we are still here waiting to see how the fate of our family will be decided. We plan to stay and fight as long as we can. This past Friday, a judge blocked these kinds of investigations. Then the Attorney General filed an appeal with an appeals court. That got rejected, but now he's pledging to take it to the state Supreme Court. So this is not done yet. Amber Briggle closes her blog post with this appeal. She says, "We are privileged to have the support system to speak out publicly. Many families do not have this, and going public with their story could put their family at greater risk. But our family has been speaking out for years, begging and pleading for you to help, and enduring death threats and policies akin to state-sanctioned kidnapping for too long. But here we are, standing strong and united as a family, pushing back against government overreach and fascist ideals that only advance one party's political agenda and not the people they've been elected to serve. We speak out today not just for our family, but for those who have been forced into silence and deserve protection too. We all need you. We cannot do it alone. We're screaming for help. Can you hear us now? Jerusalem, Jerusalem, said Jesus. How often I have desired to gather your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings. So the question for us is, will we stand with Jesus, with Aunt Yaya? Can we act as God's mothering wings, providing safe spaces and affirmation. The culture of death is stronger and bigger than any one of us. But we have chances to make oases of life inside it, to set out a glass of orange juice, sweating in a patch of sunlight so bright it's stunning. This is God's good news. Amen.